They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those we trust most. When the knife slides between your ribs, it's not the blade that destroys you, it's the hand that guided it there. She thought she knew the rules of the game: loyalty, love, family. She played by those rules for 5 years, building dreams while he built lies. But here's what they don't tell you about betrayal. Sometimes it doesn't break you. Sometimes it forges you into something harder, something dangerous. Some women retreat when their worlds collapse. Others, others declare war. This is the story of an empire built on lies, and the woman who brought it all crashing down. The Miami Marina glowed like liquid gold under the setting sun, its pristine waters reflecting the towering luxury yachts that bobbed gently against their moorings. Among them, the magnificent Ocean Dream stood as a testament to ultimate wealth, a 200-foot masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship worth $30 million. Belonging to Alexander Kane, the billionaire real estate mogul whose empire stretched across 3 continents. Isabella Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, her 7-month pregnant belly round beneath a flowing silk dress, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of coral and amber. At 28, she possessed an elegant beauty that had once graced the covers of architectural magazines when she was still designing award-winning resorts. Now, she had traded her career for the role of devoted wife to one of America's most powerful men. Their life seemed like a fairy tale written in marble and gold. The penthouse overlooked Biscayne Bay, its minimalist design showcasing Isabella's exquisite taste, Italian leather furniture, original Monet paintings, and a baby grand piano that Alexander had surprised her with on their 3rd anniversary. Their walk-in closet was the size of most people's apartments, filled with designer gowns, diamond jewelry, and handbags worth more than luxury cars. Alexander Kane, at 42, had built his empire from nothing. The son of a construction worker, he'd clawed his way to the top through ruthless determination and an uncanny ability to predict market trends. Kane Empire Holdings owned luxury resorts in the Caribbean, 5-star hotels in Europe, and exclusive residential towers in major cities worldwide. Forbes had featured him on their cover twice, calling him the king of luxury real estate. But beneath his polished exterior, the perfectly tailored Armani suits, the charming smile that graced countless magazine covers, the philanthropic galas where he wrote million-dollar checks, lay a coldness that Isabella had only recently begun to notice. He spoke to their housekeeping staff like they were invisible, dismissed her design suggestions with patronizing smiles, and had an unsettling way of viewing people as either useful or disposable. Today was Alexander's 43rd birthday, and Isabella had spent the entire afternoon preparing a surprise. She'd hired a private chef to create his favorite seafood platter, arranged for a string quartet to play their wedding song, and even commissioned a custom Rolex engraved with coordinates of the island where he'd proposed. The birthday cake, a 3-tier masterpiece from the city's most exclusive bakery, waited in their temperature-controlled wine cellar, its chocolate layers infused with rare cognac. As Isabella put the finishing touches on the dining room, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander's assistant. "Monica, Mr. Kane is in an important investor meeting on the yacht. He won't be home until late. Perhaps postpone the surprise dinner." Isabella frowned, setting down the crystal champagne flutes she'd been arranging. Alexander hadn't mentioned any meetings today. In fact, he'd specifically told her to keep the evening free because he wanted to just be together as they prepared for their son's arrival in 2 months. A flutter of unease stirred in her chest, but she quickly dismissed it. Alexander was a busy man. Last-minute meetings were part of his world. She glanced at the cake sitting in its elegant box, then made a decision that would change everything. "I'll surprise him at the marina," she whispered to herself, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "He'll love the cake, and we can still have our romantic dinner afterward." The drive to the marina took 20 minutes in her white Bentley Continental, a birthday gift from Alexander last year. Isabella's driver, Carlos, had offered to take her, but she'd insisted on driving herself. She wanted this moment to be perfect, intimate, Just the two of them, sharing a sweet surprise before their lives changed forever with the baby's arrival. The marina was quieter than usual as evening approached. Most of the day charter boats had returned, and the wealthy yacht owners were either at exclusive restaurants or preparing for evening parties. Isabella parked near the slip where Ocean Dream was moored, her heart filled with anticipation. The yacht was a floating palace, its sleek white hull gleaming under the harbor lights. Alexander had spared no expense. The main deck featured an infinity pool, a full bar, and seating for 50 guests. Below deck were 6 luxurious staterooms, a master suite larger than most hotel rooms, and a galley kitchen that could serve a 5-star restaurant. As Isabella approached the gangway, balancing the cake box carefully in her hands, she heard something that made her pause: laughter. Rich, sultry female laughter that definitely wasn't coming from a business meeting. "Darling, you're absolutely wicked," came a voice Isabella didn't recognize, smooth, confident, with a slight southern accent. "That's what you love about me," Alexander's voice replied, followed by the distinctive pop of a champagne cork. Isabella's heart began to race. The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her sudden tension. She told herself there was a logical explanation. Maybe they'd closed a major deal and were celebrating with a female investor. Alexander often entertained clients. It was part of business. But something deeper, more primal, urged her to investigate rather than announce her presence. Moving as quietly as her pregnant form would allow, Isabella climbed the side stairs that led to the upper deck, staying in the shadows cast by the yacht's superstructure. The main salon was lit by soft amber lighting, and through the panoramic windows, she could see into the luxurious interior. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. Alexander, her husband of 5 years, the father of her unborn child, was locked in a passionate embrace with a stunning blonde woman. They were on the cream-colored leather sofa where Isabella herself had chosen the fabric just 2 years ago. Scattered around them were the remnants of an intimate dinner: champagne flutes, strawberries, and what looked like jewelry boxes from Tiffany & Co. The woman was breathtaking in the way that money could buy surgically perfect features. A figure that belonged on magazine covers, and platinum blonde hair that cascaded down her back in perfect waves. She wore an emerald green cocktail dress that Isabella recognized with a shock of betrayal, so sharp it made her gasp. It was the dress Isabella had bought last Christmas for herself, but had never worn, claiming she was saving it for a special occasion. The dress she'd found missing from her closet last month when Alexander claimed he'd sent it to be dry cleaned. The woman, whoever she was, noticed Isabella's presence first. Their eyes met through the glass, and instead of shame or embarrassment, the blonde woman smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that spoke of victory and possession. "Alex, darling," the woman purred, never breaking eye contact with Isabella. "I think we have company." Alexander turned, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, husband and wife stared at each other across the barrier of glass and betrayal. Isabella stood frozen, the birthday cake trembling in her hands, her 7-month pregnant belly a testament to the family she'd thought they were building together. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice held no surprise, no shame, no regret, just cold irritation, as if Isabella had interrupted an important business call rather than discovering her marriage was a lie. "Isabella," he said, standing but making no move to separate from his companion. "You should have called first." The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Isabella felt the baby kick again, harder this time, and she wrapped her free arm protectively around her stomach. "It's your birthday," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I brought you a cake." The blonde woman laughed, a sound like broken crystal. "How thoughtful. I'm Vivian Cross. By the way, Alex has told me so much about you." Alexander didn't even try to deny what was obvious. Instead, he moved to the bar and poured himself a scotch, his movements casual and controlled. "Isabella, we need to talk, but not here. Not now. Go home." "Not here," Isabella's voice cracked. "This is our yacht. Alexander." You bought it for our anniversary. You said it represented our future together. Things change, Alexander replied with the same tone he might use to discuss a disappointing quarterly report. People grow apart. I've tried to make this work. Isabella, but you have to understand you're not the woman I married anymore. The words hit her like acid. Not the woman you married, I'm carrying your child. Vivian stood gracefully, moving to Alexander's side and placing a possessive hand on his chest. The gesture was deliberate, territorial. Alex doesn't want to hurt you, Isabella, but we're in love. Real love. Not some arrangement based on convenience and shared assets. Isabella stared at them, this woman wearing her dress, standing in her space, claiming her husband, and felt something break inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper. Her sense of reality, of who she was, of what her life meant. How long, she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Alexander and Vivian exchanged a glance. Does it matter? Alexander said finally. It matters to me. 2 years, Vivian answered with obvious satisfaction. We met when Alex hired me for the Bahamas resort campaign. I was the face of Kane Empire's luxury lifestyle division. Remember? Of course, our connection was deeper than professional. 2 years. Isabella did the math quickly. That meant the affair had started shortly after she'd gotten pregnant the first time. The pregnancy she'd lost at 4 months. The pregnancy that had devastated her, that Alexander had comforted her through, holding her while she cried and promising they'd try again when she was ready. He'd been sleeping with Vivian while Isabella mourned their lost child. The cake box slipped from Isabella's numb fingers, hitting the deck with a wet crash. Chocolate and cognac-soaked layers scattered across the pristine white surface, candles rolling into the shadows. Oops, Vivian said with mock sympathy. Accidents happen. Alexander stepped forward, and for a moment, Isabella thought he might show some remorse, some recognition of what he was destroying. Instead, he pulled out his phone. I'm calling Carlos to drive you home, he said. We'll discuss the details of our separation tomorrow. Through lawyers, of course. I won't be coming home tonight. Our separation, Isabella repeated numbly. Come on, Isabella. You're not stupid. You had to know this was coming. We've been living like roommates for months. You spend all your time planning for this baby, talking about baby names and nurseries and family traditions. When was the last time we actually connected as husband and wife? The accusation was so unfair, so twisted, that Isabella couldn't immediately respond. She'd been planning for their baby because she'd thought they were building a family together. She'd been excited about their future because she'd believed in their marriage. I love you, she whispered. Alexander's expression softened slightly, but it was the kind of pity one might show a confused child. I know you do, but love isn't enough. Isabella, you love the idea of me, the security I represent. Vivian loves me, the real me. Vivian smiled triumphantly and leaned up to kiss Alexander's cheek. We didn't plan for this to happen, but when real love finds you, you can't ignore it. Isabella looked around the salon at the furniture she'd chosen, the artwork they'd selected together, the space that had hosted their anniversary parties and quiet dinners. Everything felt like a mockery now, an elaborate stage set for a play she hadn't known she was performing in. What about our baby? She asked, her hand moving protectively to her belly. Our baby will be fine, Alexander said dismissively. You'll have everything you need, a generous settlement, child support, the best medical care. I'm not a monster, Isabella. I'll take care of my responsibilities. Responsibilities. That's what she'd become to him, a responsibility to be managed, like a difficult business partner or a problematic investment. Vivian pulled out her phone and began taking selfies with Alexander, as if Isabella weren't even there. This lighting is perfect. Don't you think very romantic? The casual cruelty was breathtaking. Isabella watched this woman, this stranger, documenting her conquest while wearing Isabella's dress, in Isabella's space, with Isabella's husband. The prenup will make this simple, Alexander continued, as if discussing a routine business transaction. You'll keep your personal accounts and jewelry, of course, the house in the Hamptons, and I'll establish a trust fund for the baby. The prenup, Isabella's legal mind, dormant since she'd quit practicing law to support Alexander's career, suddenly sharpened. You mean the prenup that specified infidelity would void the agreement? Alexander's confident expression flickered slightly. That's a technicality. It would be difficult to prove. Isabella almost smiled. Almost. Would it, because I'm looking at proof right now? Vivian's phone was still in her hands, and Isabella could see the screen dozens of photos of the couple together. Timestamps going back months. Social media posts. Intimate dinners. Romantic getaways. A complete digital record of the affair. Those are private, Vivian said quickly, clutching her phone. Posted on public social media, Isabella observed. Very private indeed. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Alexander looked uncertain. Isabella, let's be reasonable about this. We can work something out that benefits everyone. Everyone, Isabella looked between them, her cheating husband and his smug mistress. How exactly does the destruction of my marriage benefit me? Alexander, you'll be free, Vivian interjected. Free to find someone who actually wants you, instead of staying with a man who's just going through the motions. The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. But they also did something else. They ignited a spark of anger in Isabella's chest, a small flame of fury that began to burn away the shock and devastation. You're right, Isabella said quietly. I will be free. She turned to leave, then paused at the top of the stairs. Oh, and Alexander, happy birthday. I hope it was everything you wanted. As she walked away, she heard Vivian's laughter again, followed by Alexander's voice. Well, that went better than expected. She took it remarkably well. Isabella made it to her car before the tears came, sitting in the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She felt their son kick against her ribs, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in years. Marcus Chen, her law school study partner, who'd gone on to become one of Miami's most feared divorce attorneys. But before she could dial, a text message appeared on her screen from an unknown number. Enjoyed meeting you tonight. Don't worry, Alex will get bored with me too. Eventually, XOXO, Vivian. Attached was a photo, Vivian wearing Isabella's emerald earrings, the ones Alexander had given her for their 3rd anniversary while lounging on the yacht's master bed. Isabella stared at the image for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. She didn't need to keep it as evidence. She had a perfect memory for details, and she was beginning to understand that this war was just beginning. As she drove home through the neon-lit streets of Miami, one thought echoed in her mind like a promise. Alexander Kane had no idea who he was really dealing with, but he was about to find out. The penthouse felt different when Isabella returned cold and hollow, like a beautiful museum exhibit rather than a home. She walked through the rooms she'd decorated with such care, seeing them now as props in a life that had been a lie. In the nursery she'd been preparing, she sat in the rocking chair Alexander had assembled himself, claiming he wanted to be hands-on in preparing for their son's arrival. Another lie, apparently. Everything had been a lie. But as she sat there, feeling her baby move inside her, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to be the discarded wife who disappeared quietly into the night. She wasn't going to let Alexander Kane rewrite their story to cast himself as the victim of a loveless marriage. Alexander Kane thought he knew Isabella, thought she was soft, dependent, easily managed. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning arrived with brutal clarity. Isabella woke alone in their king-size bed, the space beside her still rumpled from where Alexander had supposedly slept the night before, though she now understood he hadn't been home in who knows how long. The morning sunlight streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows seemed harsher somehow, exposing the illusion of perfection that had been her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Stayed at the office. We need to discuss arrangements. I've scheduled a meeting with lawyers for Thursday. Arrangements, not their marriage, not their future, not their child. Arrangements, like she was a business problem to be solved. Isabella tried to eat breakfast, but everything tasted like ash. The organic fruit Alexander's nutritionist had prescribed, the imported coffee he insisted on, all of it felt like remnants of someone else's life. She found herself standing in their walk-in closet, staring at the empty space where her emerald dress should have been, trying to remember when she'd stopped noticing the small disappearances, the subtle changes in Alexander's behavior. The signs had been there. Working late more often, business trips that seemed to require no follow-up, the way he'd stopped asking about her day, stopped commenting on her growing belly, stopped talking about their future as a family. But the cruelest revelation was her own naivety. She'd attributed his distance to work stress, to the pressure of expanding his empire. She'd made excuses for him even as he was methodically planning his exit from their marriage. By noon, Isabella had made her first move. She called Dr. Sarah Martinez, their family physician, and scheduled an emergency appointment under the pretense of pregnancy concerns. What she really needed was documentation of her current health status, something that might become important in custody proceedings. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, Dr. Martinez noted, her brow furrowed with concern. Are you experiencing unusual stress? Isabella almost laughed. Unusual stress? You could say that. Isabella, is everything all right at home? You seem different today. The kindness in Dr. Martinez's voice nearly broke Isabella's composure. My marriage is ending, she said simply. My husband is having an affair. Dr. Martinez set down her clipboard and really looked at Isabella for the first time during the appointment. I'm so sorry. Do you have support family friends? The question hit Isabella like a cold wave. In the 5 years of her marriage to Alexander, she'd gradually lost touch with most of her old friends. Alexander's social circle had become hers wealthy couples who attended the same galas, vacationed in the same exclusive destinations, and measured success in net worth and social status. None of them would take her side over Alexander's. Her family lived in Oregon, where she'd grown up middle class and happy before law school led her to Miami and into Alexander's orbit. They'd never fully understood her marriage to a man so different from their values, though they'd tried to be supportive. I'm figuring that out, Isabella admitted. Dr. Martinez wrote something in Isabella's file, then looked up with professional determination. I want to see you again in 2 weeks. And Isabella, document everything. In situations like this, records matter. The appointment gave Isabella her first concrete step documentation. But as she sat in her car outside the medical building, she realized she needed more than medical records. She needed someone who understood the battlefield she was entering. Marcus Chen's law office occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Isabella hadn't seen him since a law school reunion 5 years ago, but she'd followed his career from a distance. He'd built a reputation as the lawyer wealthy men feared most in divorce proceedings, brilliant, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to his clients. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, looked Isabella up and down with professional assessment. Mrs. Kane, Mr. Chen is waiting for you. Marcus looked exactly as Isabella remembered, tall, lean, with the sharp intelligence that had made him law review editor, and the intensity that had driven him to graduate summa cum laude. His office reflected his success original artwork, floor-to-ceiling law books, and a view of Biscayne Bay that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries. Isabella, he said, standing as she entered. You look. He paused, taking in her 7-month pregnancy and the circles under her eyes. You look like you need coffee and legal advice. In that order? Despite everything, Isabella smiled. It's good to see you too, Marcus. He gestured to a comfortable seating area away from his imposing desk. Tell me everything. And I mean everything. This isn't the time for privacy or embarrassment. Isabella told him about the yacht, about Vivian, about Alexander's cold dismissal of their marriage. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "The prenup," he said when she finished. "I need to see it immediately. I have a copy at home. But Marcus, there's something else. Alexander mentioned having lawyers ready, like this was all planned, and the way he dismissed the infidelity clause so easily." Marcus leaned forward. "You think he's been preparing for this? I think he's been planning this for months, maybe longer." Isabella's voice strengthened as the pieces fell into place. "The business trips, the separate bedrooms when I was having morning sickness, the way he encouraged me to quit working. Marcus, what if this was all calculated? If it was, then Alexander Kane made a critical error." Marcus's smile was sharp and predatory. He underestimated his opponent. They spent the next 2 hours going through Isabella's assets, her legal rights, and the complexities of Florida divorce law. Marcus explained that while prenups were generally enforceable, infidelity clauses were taken seriously by Florida courts, especially when the wrong spouse was pregnant. "But here's what concerns me," Marcus said, pulling up something on his computer. "I've been tracking Kane Empire's stock movements and recent transactions. There's been some unusual activity, large asset transfers, restructuring of holdings. If Alexander has been planning this divorce, he might also be hiding assets." The thought made Isabella feel sick. How much could he hide? Hundreds of millions, potentially. But Isabella, if we can prove he's been systematically moving assets in preparation for divorce while carrying on an affair. Marcus's eyes gleamed. "That's fraud. That changes everything." As if summoned by their conversation, Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Lawyers' meeting moved to tomorrow, 2 p.m. Don't bring representation. This should be simple." Marcus read the message over Isabella's shoulder and laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Simple? Right." He looked at Isabella seriously. "Do not go to that meeting alone. In fact, don't go at all. From now on, all communication goes through me." Isabella felt a surge of relief and something else, the first stirrings of hope. "What's our first move? We investigate, and we document everything. Your husband thinks he's dealing with the woman who gave up her career to play housewife. He has no idea he's about to face Isabella Kane, Esquire, backed by the best divorce attorney in Miami." That evening, Isabella returned to the penthouse with new purpose. Alexander still wasn't home, and she used his absence to her advantage. In his home office, a space she'd rarely entered during their marriage, she began her investigation. Alexander was meticulous about record-keeping, a trait that had served him well in business. What he hadn't counted on was Isabella's legal mind and her intimate knowledge of his habits. She knew his password patterns, his filing systems, his backup locations for important documents. What she found in his files made her blood run cold. Financial records showed systematic transfers of assets over the past 18 months, money moved to offshore accounts, properties transferred to shell companies, investments liquidated and repositioned. Alexander hadn't just been planning to leave her. He'd been preparing to leave her with as little as possible, but it was what she found in his email drafts that truly revealed the scope of his betrayal. A message to Vivian, dated 6 months ago. "V lawyers confirm the pregnancy complicates things, but doesn't change the timeline. We'll need to be more careful until after the divorce. The prenup has loopholes, but I'm working on minimizing her settlement. By Christmas, we'll be free to be together openly." Another draft, more recent. "Meeting with financial advisors went well. Most assets now protected from divorce proceedings. Isabella will get the minimum required by law, enough to keep her quiet, but not enough to threaten our future. She's always been trusting. I don't expect her to fight hard." Isabella sat back in Alexander's leather chair, her hands shaking with rage. Christmas. He'd planned to destroy their marriage by Christmas, probably timing it so he could give Vivian some romantic holiday proposal. But the most damning evidence was a folder labeled V Personal. Inside were dozens of printed photos of Vivian, receipts for jewelry and trips Isabella had never known about, and hotel reservations spanning back 2 years. Alexander had been living a double life, financing it with their joint accounts while Isabella planned for their future. There was also something else, business documents that looked suspicious even to Isabella's trained eye. Contracts for a casino development in Nevada that she'd never heard Alexander mention, partnerships with companies that seemed to exist only on paper, and payment records to consulting firms that appeared to have no legitimate function. Isabella photographed everything with her phone, careful to return each document to its exact position. Then she searched for Alexander's backup drives, the external storage devices, where he kept encrypted copies of his most sensitive files. She found them in the safe behind their wedding photo, the combination, their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she copied the encrypted files to her own device, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of the hunt that had made her a formidable lawyer before she'd given it all up for love. Alexander Kane thought he was playing chess while she played checkers. He was about to discover that Isabella had been playing chess all along. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to reveal her strategy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian's number. "Hope you're feeling better today. Alex says you're taking the news well. So mature of you, by the way. I borrowed a few more things from your closet. Hope you don't mind. XOXO." Attached were photos of Vivian wearing Isabella's jewelry, her designer handbags, even her custom-made wedding ring from her first marriage, a family heirloom Isabella had treasured. Instead of responding with anger, Isabella screenshotted the messages and forwarded them to Marcus with a note. More evidence of asset theft and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then she sat in Alexander's chair, in his space, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and began to plan, not just her divorce strategy, but her complete reinvention. Alexander Kane was about to learn that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't just cheating on his wife, it was underestimating her. By the time she heard his key in the door at midnight, Isabella was ready. She met him in the foyer, no longer the devastated woman from the yacht. "We need to talk," she said calmly. Alexander looked surprised by her composure. "Isabella, I thought we agreed to handle this through lawyers." "We did. I just wanted you to know that I hired Marcus Chen to represent me." The color drained from Alexander's face. Marcus Chen's reputation preceded him, especially his perfect record against wealthy men who thought they could steamroll their wives in divorce proceedings. "That seems excessive," Alexander said carefully. Isabella smiled, a expression she'd learned from watching Alexander in business negotiations. Cool, confident, revealing nothing. "I thought you'd appreciate thorough preparation. After all, you've been preparing for this for 18 months. Alexander's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but good night." "Alexander," Isabella interrupted, turning toward the master bedroom. "I'll be staying in the guest room from now on. We wouldn't want to complicate things further." As she walked away, she heard Alexander's phone buzzing frantically. Probably Vivian, wondering why he wasn't at whatever love nest they'd established. Isabella closed the guest room door and placed her hand on her belly, where their son was kicking actively, as if sensing the change in his mother's energy. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure you have everything you deserve, and Daddy's going to learn that actions have consequences." The next phase of her plan would require careful timing, strategic patience, and the kind of ruthless precision that Alexander had taught her through years of watching him destroy his business opponents. Isabella Kane was about to become Alexander Kane's greatest adversary, and unlike his business rivals, she knew all his weaknesses. 3 weeks had passed since the yacht confrontation, and Isabella had been busy. Working with Marcus Chen and his team of investigators, she'd assembled a dossier on Alexander and Vivian that would have impressed the FBI. Financial records, communication logs, surveillance photos, and witness statements painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple adultery. Marcus's private investigator, Elena Rodriguez, had proven invaluable, a former federal agent with a talent for uncovering hidden assets. Elena had traced Alexander's money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. What they discovered was staggering. Alexander had moved over $200 million in assets beyond the reach of divorce proceedings, using methods that bordered on criminal. "Your husband is either very smart or very arrogant," Elena reported during one of their strategy sessions. "He's left just enough of a paper trail to hang himself." But tonight wasn't about financial investigations or legal strategies. Tonight was about the perfect stage for Isabella's revelation, the annual Kane Empire Holdings Charity Gala, where Alexander would receive the Miami Business Council's Entrepreneur of the Year award in front of 500 of the city's most influential people. Isabella had been planning this moment with the precision of a military operation. She'd known about the gala for months, had helped Alexander choose his tuxedo, had her own gown custom-made by a designer whose waiting list was normally 2 years long. Alexander assumed she wouldn't attend, that she'd retreat into quiet shame like a discarded wife should. He couldn't have been more wrong. The Fontainebleau's grand ballroom glittered like a scene from a movie. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents. Miami's elite mingled in their finest attire, sipping champagne and discussing the kinds of deals that moved markets and changed skylines. Isabella arrived precisely at 8 p.m., when the cocktail hour was in full swing, but before the formal dinner. She'd chosen her entrance carefully, fashionably late enough to make an impact, early enough to ensure maximum exposure for what was to come. She wore a stunning midnight blue gown that accommodated her 8-month pregnancy while maintaining an aura of power and elegance. The dress was new, purchased specifically for tonight, and it fit her like liquid silk. Her jewelry was her own pieces inherited from her grandmother that Alexander had never seen, ensuring he couldn't claim them later. The reaction to her entrance was immediate. Conversations paused as people noticed Isabella Kane, the woman who should have been hiding in shame, looking radiant and confident instead. Society photographers snapped pictures, sensing a story even if they didn't yet know what it was. Alexander stood near the bar with Vivian, who was draped in a gold sequined gown that screamed expensive desperation. They were playing the part of the newly revealed couple, accepting congratulations from guests who'd heard whispers about Alexander's amicable separation from his pregnant wife. When Alexander saw Isabella, his champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Vivian's laugh died in her throat, her predatory smile replaced by something approaching panic. Isabella approached them with the grace of a queen visiting her subjects. The crowd around them sensed the tension and began to step back, creating a circle of anticipation. "Alexander," Isabella said warmly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Congratulations on your award. You must be so proud." Alexander's eyes darted around the watching crowd, then back to his wife. "Isabella, I didn't expect you to come. Wouldn't miss it," Isabella replied with a smile that could have graced magazine covers. "After all, I helped build this company too. It's wonderful to see it recognized." Vivian stepped closer to Alexander, a gesture meant to mark territory. "Isabella, how nice to see you again. You look well for someone in your situation." The barely veiled insult was delivered with Southern Belle sweetness, but Isabella caught the venom underneath. Around them, the crowd leaned in slightly, sensing drama. "Thank you, Vivian. I feel wonderful, actually. Pregnancy agrees with me." Isabella's hand moved to her belly in a gesture that was both protective and pointed. "I'm sure you understand the joy of creating new life." The comment hit its mark. Vivian's face flushed slightly, and Alexander's jaw tightened. Isabella had done her research. Vivian had never been pregnant, had no children, and had publicly stated in interviews that she found the whole concept aesthetically challenging. "Well," Alexander said quickly, trying to regain control of the conversation, "perhaps we should—" "Oh, don't let me interrupt," Isabella said graciously. "I just wanted to congratulate you both, and to let everyone know that despite our personal differences, I harbor no ill will. In fact, I have some exciting news to share tonight." The crowd pressed closer. This was better than entertainment. This was real-life drama involving some of Miami's most prominent figures. "News?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully controlled but his eyes showing the first hints of panic. Isabella smiled brilliantly. I'll save it for your speech. Wouldn't want to steal your thunder. She leaned in and kissed Alexander's cheek, the gesture appearing affectionate to observers, but allowing her to whisper in his ear, "Enjoy your moment, Alexander. It's the last one you'll have." As she moved away, Isabella heard Vivian hiss to Alexander, "What is she planning? You said she'd sign the papers." Isabella hadn't signed anything. In fact, when the papers Alexander's lawyers had presented were so one-sided, they bordered on insulting a settlement that would have left her with less than 1% of Alexander's true wealth while signing away any future claims. Marcus had laughed when he'd reviewed them. "These aren't settlement papers," he'd said. "These are surrender documents." Dinner was served at precisely 9 p.m. Isabella had arranged to sit at the head table, using her position as Alexander's wife and a major donor to various charities. She chatted pleasantly with the mayor's wife, discussed architecture with a museum director, and played the part of the gracious society hostess she'd been trained to be, all while watching Alexander grow increasingly nervous at the podium table. At 10:30, the award presentation began. The president of the Miami Business Council delivered a glowing introduction, highlighting Alexander's rise from humble beginnings to real estate empire, his philanthropic efforts, and his vision for Miami's future. Alexander took the stage to thunderous applause, looking every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He held the Crystal Award, a towering piece that caught the light like captured starfire, and began his acceptance speech. "Thank you for this incredible honor," he said, his voice carrying the confidence that had closed billion-dollar deals. "When I started Kane Empire Holdings 15 years ago, I had a vision of creating more than just buildings. I wanted to create dreams, experiences, legacies that would last generations." Isabella watched from her table, her expression pleasant and attentive, like any proud wife. Inside, her heart hammered with anticipation. "I couldn't have achieved any of this alone," Alexander continued, his eyes finding Isabella in the crowd. "I've been blessed with incredible partners, dedicated employees, and unwavering support from my family." The irony of his words wasn't lost on anyone who knew the real story. "But success isn't just about what we build," Alexander said, warming to his theme. "It's about the foundation we stand on: integrity, honesty, and the trust of those who believe in our vision." That was Isabella's cue. She stood gracefully, her movement catching the attention of the spotlight operator, who instinctively followed her. The room's attention shifted as Isabella began walking toward the stage, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Alexander's speech faltered. That is... Please, don't stop on my account," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent ballroom. "You were talking about integrity and honesty. I'd love to hear more about that." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't part of the program. Society galas didn't usually feature pregnant women interrupting award speeches. Alexander's face went pale, but he tried to maintain control. "Isabella, perhaps this isn't the best time." "Actually, Alexander, this is the perfect time." Isabella had reached the stage now, and the microphone picked up her voice as she addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I have something important to share about the man you're honoring tonight." The ballroom fell into complete silence. 500 of Miami's most powerful people leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. "My husband is absolutely right about the importance of integrity," Isabella continued, her voice steady and clear, "which is why I feel compelled to share some information about Kane Empire Holdings that I believe you should know." From her evening bag, Isabella pulled out a tablet device. The gesture seemed casual, but it had been planned for maximum effect. "You see, while researching my husband's business practices for what I thought would be a loving tribute speech, I discovered some interesting financial documents." Alexander started to move toward her, but Isabella held up her hand. "Please, darling, let me finish. This is important. On the screens positioned around the ballroom screens, normally used for slide presentations during charity auctions, images began to appear. Financial records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts. The evidence Marcus and Elena had spent weeks compiling. These documents show that over the past 18 months, Alexander has systematically moved over $200 million in assets to offshore accounts, Isabella announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. Money that was transferred to shell companies designed to hide assets from taxation and legal scrutiny. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people stood to get better views of the screens. Photographers surged forward, their cameras flashing like lightning. "That's not all," Isabella continued, her voice rising above the chaos. "These records also show payments to consulting firms that appear to exist only on paper, contracts for development projects that were never intended to be completed, and systematic tax evasion that has cost Florida taxpayers millions in lost revenue." Alexander finally found his voice. "These are lies. Private financial documents taken without authorization?" "Oh, they're quite authorized," Isabella replied calmly. "Taken from the safe in our shared home office. Using the combination you chose our wedding anniversary. How romantic." The irony brought bitter laughter from some in the crowd. But Isabella wasn't finished. The next series of images that appeared on the screens were personal photos Alexander and Vivian in locations around the world. Timestamps showing the photos were taken during business trips when Isabella thought her husband was working. "And while my husband was stealing from taxpayers and investors," Isabella said, "he was also stealing from our marriage. These photos document a 2-year affair with Ms. Vivian Cross, financed with money from our joint accounts while I planned for our future and prepared to bring his son into the world." Vivian, who had been trying to slip toward the exit, found herself trapped as photographers turned their attention to her. Her gold dress that had seemed so glamorous now looked garish under the harsh scrutiny of camera flashes. "The woman my husband has been supporting," Isabella continued relentlessly, "has a criminal record including fraud and extortion, records that are easily accessible through public databases. If anyone had bothered to look." The screens now showed Vivian's arrest record, mugshots, and court documents detailing her previous convictions. Alexander made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Security. This woman is having some kind of breakdown." But security didn't move. They were as transfixed as everyone else by the methodical destruction of Alexander Kane's reputation. Isabella looked at her husband with something approaching pity. "Alexander, you taught me that in business. Information is power. You also taught me that the most successful deals are the ones where your opponent doesn't realize they're losing until it's too late." She turned back to the crowd, her voice carrying clearly throughout the silent ballroom. "I want everyone here to know that I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning," she announced. "And given the evidence of fraud, tax evasion, and asset hiding, I'm also turning these financial records over to the FBI, the IRS, and the Securities and Exchange Commission." The ballroom erupted again, but this time the chaos had direction. Reporters were on their phones. Investors were demanding answers. And the very people who had been congratulating Alexander minutes earlier were now backing away from him as if he carried a contagious disease. Alexander stood alone on the stage, the crystal award still in his hands, watching his empire crumble in real time. The look on his face was one Isabella would remember forever, the moment a man who had controlled everything realized he had lost it all. But Isabella had one final revelation. "Oh, and Alexander," she called out as she prepared to leave the stage. "The prenup you're counting on to limit my settlement, the one with the infidelity clause you thought you could ignore. My lawyers informed me that fraud voids all prenuptial agreements under Florida law. So when the divorce is final, I'll be entitled to 50% of everything, including the assets you thought you'd hidden." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella placed the microphone back on the podium and walked gracefully from the stage, her hand resting protectively on her belly. As she moved through the crowd, people stepped aside like she was royalty, some nodding with respect, others applauding softly. Behind her, she heard Alexander's voice crack as he tried to explain, to justify, to somehow undo what had just happened. But it was too late. In 15 minutes, Isabella had accomplished what Alexander's enemies had failed to do in 15 years. She'd completely destroyed him. Marcus Chen was waiting for her in the lobby, a satisfied smile on his face. "How do you feel?" he asked. Isabella considered the question as they walked toward the exit, leaving behind the chaos of the ballroom and the ruins of Alexander's reputation. "Powerful," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel powerful." Outside, Miami glittered in the warm night air, full of possibility and promise. Isabella Kane had entered the gala as a wronged wife. She was leaving as something much more dangerous, a woman who had discovered her own strength. And this was just the beginning. 6 months after the gala that became known in Miami society circles as the Kane Scandal, Isabella stood in the nursery of her new penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. Baby Lucas slept peacefully in his crib, his tiny fist curled against his cheek, blissfully unaware that his birth had coincided with one of the most spectacular corporate collapses in Florida history. The view from Isabella's new home was even more stunning than the one she'd shared with Alexander. This penthouse, purchased with her divorce settlement, occupied the entire top floor of a building she now owned. One of several properties acquired as Kane Empire Holdings was systematically dismantled and sold to satisfy the criminal restitution orders. Marcus Chen had been right about the fraud charges. Within hours of Isabella's revelation at the gala, federal investigators had seized Alexander's records, frozen his accounts, and begun the complex process of unraveling 15 years of financial crimes. The evidence Isabella had provided became the foundation for indictments on 17 federal charges, including tax evasion, money laundering, and securities fraud. Alexander was currently serving a 12-year sentence in federal prison, his fall from billionaire to inmate complete. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now worked in the prison library for $0. 85 an hour, his former life of luxury replaced by institutional meals and orange jumpsuits. But Isabella's transformation had been even more dramatic. The divorce settlement had awarded her not just money, but ownership of several key Kane Empire properties. Rather than simply liquidate them, Isabella had done something unexpected. She'd hired Alexander's former employees and rebuilt the company as Verde Holdings, focusing on sustainable development and environmental restoration. Her first project had been converting Alexander's beloved yacht, Ocean Dream, into a floating marine research facility, partnering with the University of Miami to study coral reef restoration. The vessel that had been the scene of her ultimate betrayal now served as a symbol of renewal and scientific hope. Standing in her office, a space designed with floor-to-ceiling windows and living walls of plants, Isabella reviewed the morning's reports. Verde Holdings had just closed a deal to restore a damaged resort in the Bahamas, turning it into the Caribbean's first completely carbon-neutral vacation destination. The project would employ 300 people and include a marine sanctuary that would help restore the coral reefs Alexander's developments had damaged. "Knock, knock," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Isabella looked up to see Dr. James Mitchell, carrying coffee and wearing the easy smile that had first caught her attention at a charity event 3 months ago. James was everything Alexander wasn't: warm, genuine, more interested in helping people than accumulating wealth. As a doctor with Médecins Sans Frontières, he spent half his time in refugee camps and disaster zones, bringing medical care to people who needed it most. "How's my favorite CEO this morning?" James asked, setting the coffee on her desk and kissing her cheek. "You're only CEO," Isabella corrected, accepting the kiss with a smile that would have surprised people who remembered the quiet, submissive wife she'd once been. James had been a revelation. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than the passion and power dynamics that had characterized her marriage to Alexander. James loved her mind, supported her ambitions, and treated Lucas like his own son from the moment they'd met. "Any word from the publishers?" James asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Isabella's book, Rebuilding After Betrayal, A Guide to Reclaiming Your Power, had become an unexpected bestseller. What had started as a therapeutic exercise writing about her experience to process the trauma had become a manifesto for women facing similar situations. The book detailed not just her personal journey, but practical advice on recognizing financial abuse, protecting assets, and building new lives after devastating betrayals. The international rights sold to 12 more countries, Isabella reported, and the Isabella Kane Foundation received another major donation, $500,000 from a woman in London whose husband tried to hide assets during their divorce. She said the book saved her life. The foundation had become Isabella's greatest pride. Operating out of a restored mansion in Coral Gables, it provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to women navigating divorces from powerful men. They'd handled over 200 cases in their first year, with a 94% success rate in securing fair settlements for their clients. Isabella had also partnered with Marcus Chen to establish a legal clinic offering pro bono representation in complex divorce cases. Their team of attorneys specialized in uncovering hidden assets, identifying financial fraud, and holding wealthy spouses accountable for their deceptions. "There's something else," James said, his tone becoming more serious. "The warden called this morning." Isabella's expression didn't change, but she set down her coffee cup carefully. What did Alexander want? For the past 6 months, Alexander had been writing letters, first angry and threatening, then pleading, finally desperate. Isabella had read none of them, but James, in his role as her partner and protector, occasionally dealt with the more persistent attempts at contact. "He wants to meet Lucas," James said carefully. "Claims he has legal rights as the father." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the bay where sailboats moved across the water like white birds. Lucas was 4 months old now, healthy and happy, showing signs of his mother's intelligence and determination. He had never met his biological father, and Isabella intended to keep it that way. "Marcus already handled this," she said finally. "Alexander signed away his parental rights as part of the plea agreement. He has no legal claim to Lucas, and given his criminal record, no court would grant him custody or visitation rights." "But emotionally," James asked gently, "how are you handling it?" It was the kind of question James always asked, not just about the legal or practical aspects of situations, but about their emotional impact. It was one of the many ways he differed from Alexander, who had viewed emotions as weaknesses to be managed rather than feelings to be acknowledged. "I'm fine," Isabella said, then caught herself. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm relieved. Lucas will grow up knowing that his mother fought for him, protected him, and built a better world for him. He'll never have to wonder if his father loved him. He'll know that the man who chose to be his father, who chose us, loves him completely." James smiled, the expression soft and genuine. "Have I mentioned lately that I'm crazy about you?" "Only every day," Isabella replied, but her tone was warm. "Which is why I have something to ask you." From her desk drawer, Isabella pulled out a small velvet box. James's eyes widened as she opened it to reveal a simple platinum band. "James Mitchell," she said, standing and moving around the desk to kneel beside his chair. "You've shown me what real love looks like. You've helped me build a life I never knew I wanted. Will you marry me?" The role reversal woman proposing to man was deliberate. Isabella had learned that the most powerful relationships were built on equality, mutual choice, and shared values rather than traditional expectations. James laughed, pulling her up and into his arms. "I thought you'd never ask." "Of course. Yes. 1,000 times yes." As they kissed, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete happiness. Not the artificial perfection she'd pursued with Alexander, but genuine contentment built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. That afternoon, Isabella stood in the Verde Holdings conference room, addressing her board of directors. The room was filled with environmental scientists, sustainable development experts, and social entrepreneurs, people who measured success in terms of positive impact rather than just profit margins. "Our Bahamas project is ahead of schedule and under budget," Isabella reported. "But more importantly, Preliminary studies show the coral restoration is exceeding expectations. We've documented a 40% increase in marine life diversity in just 3 months. Dr. Sarah Chen, Verde's chief environmental officer, pulled up underwater footage on the main screen. The reef structures we've installed are not only supporting existing marine life, they're attracting new species. The resort guests are having incredible diving experiences while participating in actual conservation. Isabella smiled, watching footage of tropical fish swimming through artificial reef structures designed to replace coral damaged by previous development. This was what she'd envisioned when she decided to rebuild rather than simply inherit business that restored rather than consumed. That left the world better than it found it. The success in the Bahamas has generated new opportunities, added Maria Santos, Isabella's former colleague who had become Verde's director of operations. We have proposals for similar projects in Costa Rica, Hawaii, and the Maldives. As the meeting continued, Isabella felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or revenge. She transformed her pain into purpose, her betrayal into a blueprint for helping others. Verde Holdings wasn't just profitable, it was making a genuine difference in the world. Later that evening, Isabella sat in Lucas's nursery, feeding him while James assembled a new bookshelf. The domestic scene was so different from her life with Alexander, quieter, more genuine, built on partnership rather than power. I got a call from 60 Minutes today, Isabella mentioned casually. They want to do a feature on the foundation in the Verde Holdings model. James looked up from the instruction manual he was studying. Are you interested? Isabella considered the question. A year ago, she would have automatically deferred to Alexander's opinion about media appearances. Now, she made her own decisions based on her own priorities. I think so, not for the publicity, but because it might encourage other women to speak up, and it could bring more attention to the conservation work we're doing. Then you should do it, James said simply. James, Didi. Your story has already helped so many people. Why stop now? As if sensing the conversation. Lucas stirred in Isabella's arms, opening his dark eyes and looking up at his mother with the kind of trust that had to be earned rather than demanded. What do you think, little man? Isabella whispered. Should Mommy tell the world how we built our new life? Lucas grabbed her finger with his tiny fist, and Isabella chose to interpret it as encouragement. Outside their windows, Miami glittered with possibility. Somewhere in the city, Alexander sat in his federal prison cell, probably writing another letter that would never be answered. Vivian Cross had disappeared after her own conviction on conspiracy charges. Last seen boarding a bus to somewhere no one cared to follow. But their absence didn't define Isabella's present. She'd learned that the opposite of betrayal wasn't revenge. It was building something so beautiful, so meaningful, that the past became irrelevant. As James finished assembling the bookshelf and Isabella settled Lucas into his crib, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The yacht where she'd discovered Alexander's betrayal was now advancing marine science. The gala where she'd exposed his crimes had become a catalyst for the foundation that was helping hundreds of women. The penthouse where she'd felt trapped and diminished had been replaced by a home filled with love, purpose, and genuine partnership. Isabella Kane had entered her marriage as a successful lawyer who'd given up her career for love. She'd emerged from her divorce as something much more powerful, a woman who had transformed her worst betrayal into her greatest triumph. And as she watched her son sleep peacefully in the nursery, she'd designed herself, in the home she'd bought with money she'd fought for, beside the man who had chosen to love them both. Isabella knew the truth. The best revenge wasn't getting even. The best revenge was living well. Very, very well. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Isabella's corner office at Verde Holdings, illuminating the wall of awards the company had received for environmental innovation and social impact. The business had grown from a single restoration project to an international corporation with offices in 7 countries. But Isabella had never lost sight of its founding mission to prove that business could be a force for healing rather than destruction. A knock at her door interrupted her review of the quarterly sustainability report. "Come in," she called, expecting her assistant with the morning schedule. Instead, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, someone she hadn't seen in 5 years, but recognized immediately, even though prison had aged him considerably. Alexander Kane stood there in an ill-fitting suit, his once perfect appearance replaced by the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. "Hello, Isabella," he said quietly. Isabella felt James's presence behind Alexander before she saw him. Her husband had clearly escorted Alexander up from the lobby, and his protective stance suggested he was ready to remove the unwelcome visitor at any moment. "It's okay," Isabella told James, though she appreciated his instinct to shield her. "Mr. Kane, you have 5 minutes." Alexander entered the office slowly, his eyes taking in the success that surrounded Isabella, the photographs of restored reefs, the awards from environmental organizations, the pictures of her with world leaders discussing climate change initiatives. "You look well," he said finally. "I am well," Isabella replied calmly. "What do you want?" "Alexander." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to struggle with words. "I wanted to apologize and to ask if I could meet my son." Isabella had been prepared for this request. Marcus Chen had warned her that Alexander's release from federal prison would likely lead to an attempt at contact. "Lucas has a father," Isabella said simply. "James adopted him 3 years ago, legally and in every way that matters. You have no connection to my son. But biologically, biology doesn't make you a father. Alexander, being there does. Choosing your child's welfare over your own does. You forfeited any claim to that title when you chose to betray our family." Alexander's composure cracked slightly. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I've paid for them. 5 years in prison. Isabella, I lost everything." "You didn't lose everything," Isabella corrected. "You threw it away. There's a difference." Through the office windows, Isabella could see the marina where this story had begun 5 years ago. The Ocean Dream was visible among the research vessels, its white hull now bearing the logo of the marine conservation program it supported. "I know what I did was unforgivable," Alexander continued, "but Lucas is my son too. Doesn't that mean anything?" Isabella stood and walked to her window, looking out at the bay where sailboats moved peacefully across the water. When she spoke, her voice was calm but final. "Do you see that yacht down there? Alexander, the one you used for your affairs while I planned our future? It's now helping restore the coral reefs your developments destroyed. It's contributing something positive to the world instead of just taking from it." She turned back to face him. "That's what redemption looks like. Not asking for forgiveness, but earning it through actions. Not demanding rights you forfeited, but building new purpose from the ruins of your mistakes." "I could change," Alexander said desperately. "I could be better." "Perhaps you could," Isabella agreed. "But that journey has nothing to do with me or my son. You'll have to find your own path to redemption, just like I found mine." James stepped forward slightly, and Isabella knew their time was up. "Your 5 minutes are over," she said. "James will escort you out. Please don't attempt to contact me again. I've built a new life, Alexander, and there's no place in it for the past." As Alexander was led away, Isabella felt something she hadn't expected: pity, not for the man who had betrayed her, but for the man who still couldn't understand that some choices couldn't be undone, some trust couldn't be rebuilt. That evening, Isabella sat on her terrace overlooking the bay, watching 5-year-old Lucas play with James in the pool below. Her son was confident, happy, surrounded by love and security. He called James Daddy and had never known a world where he wasn't completely wanted and cherished. Her phone buzzed with a text from her publisher. 60 Minutes piece generated 50,000 new book sales and crashed the foundation's website with donation requests. Your story is still changing lives. Isabella smiled, setting the phone aside. She'd learned that success wasn't measured in money or revenge, but in the lives you touched and the positive change you created in the world. As the sun set over Miami, painting the sky in shades of gold and coral, Isabella Kane Mitchell reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd entered her marriage as someone who defined herself through another person's success. She'd emerged from its destruction as someone who had built her own empire, one based on healing rather than harm, on lifting others rather than climbing over them. The betrayal that had once shattered her world had become the foundation for a life more meaningful than she'd ever imagined possible. And the best part was knowing that her story, their story, was still being written, one day of purpose and love at a time. In the pool below, Lucas's laughter echoed across the water as James caught him in a gentle tackle, both of them splashing and playing without a care in the world. This, Isabella knew, was what real victory looked like, not the destruction of your enemies, but the creation of something so beautiful that their absence became irrelevant. Alexander Kane had taught her that betrayal was possible, but James and Lucas had taught her something more important, that love, real love, was not only possible but worth fighting for, building toward, and protecting with everything you had. And as the stars began to appear over Biscayne Bay, Isabella Kane Mitchell knew that the best chapters of her story were still ahead of her.